Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you compilations of my previous seasons in this Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls series. This series covers seasons 6, 7, and 8. And this podcast clips of 4 interviews from my previous seasons makes up the title of episode 65. Edge of 17, how failures and successes of the 2017 initial coin offering era led to later advancements in cryptographic innovation. This podcast clips, and all my podcasts are available on Spotify, on YouTube, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find the Crypto Hipster Podcast Station, and you can listen to my interviews in their entirety on that station. So this podcast consists of 4 clips, from 2 from season 8, 1 from season 7, and 1 from season 6. To kick off this podcast clip compilation was my conversation in June 5th, 2024 with Oliver von Landsberg-Sadie. He's the head of strategic partnerships at MPCH. He and I spoke as part of my series of Crypto Hipster Presents Reporter on the Ground, which were a series of interviews I conducted while at Consensus 2024. We spoke about building cryptographically secure cold storage facilities for institutions. A very interesting conversation, not too long, 21 minutes. On the shorter side of my podcast, usually I go 35 on average, but this was on the ground. It was a great conversation, and please check it out. And hopefully I could be at further conferences in 2026 and 2027. Second was a conversation with Bogdan Habic. Bogdan is the co-founder and CTO at Tenderly. We spoke about building, scaling, and developing large-scale distributed cloud systems on the blockchain ground floor in Serbia. So if you have interested in what's going on in crypto and blockchain in Serbia, definitely don't want to miss this conversation. It was from my second interview in season 6, way back in August, end of August 2023. Third, from season 8, conversation with CEO Butain, who is the CEO of the Bless Network. And we talked about what it's like, and then we talked about in March 2025, what it's like to pioneer the world's first supercomputer powered by handheld devices. That's a wonderful conversation. And if you only have a handheld device and not a computer, you're welcome and you are in good shape investing in crypto. And then fourth, last but not least, was a wonderful discussion in January of 2025, season 8, with Teemu, Päivinen, who is the founder and CEO of ZkCloud. We talked about unlocking the future of blockchain with zero-knowledge proofs. And zero-knowledge proofs was one of the key innovations that came out of the ICO era that lasted. Successes still around and been built upon great and wonderful cryptos that lived and made it through the 2017 era. Included Chainlink, Ethereum, Cardano. So check that out. Again, this has been episode 65. 65. We have 2 more to go after this one. We're going to 67, and there will only ever be 67 Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls episodes. This is entitled The Edge of 17, how the failures and successes of the 2017 ICO offering era led to later advancements in cryptographic innovation. Thanks for tuning in. I'll check me out for the next 2 episodes, and then we'll be kicking off season 10 shortly. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you around soon. Thanks.
One of the things I want to find out is about shielding reputations, right? How do you shield reputations from security breaches?
shielding reputations from security breaches? That's an interesting question, one I haven't really properly considered. I think in a business model that involves any kind of privacy or security measure, a custodian, or even in a bank or a payments institution, ultimately the core asset isn't the tech, it isn't it isn't anything peripheral, it is trust. And that is something that you can only earn through a track record of zero failure. It only takes one failure to erode trust in a second that you've built over 10 years. So I think, and that's kind of ironic because one of the core tenets of the whole crypto industry is to be trustless, right? Bitcoin as a blockchain, the whole Byzantine generals problem is solved because you can have two opposing entities that don't have to trust each other to transact. But ultimately, any custodian, any bank, any secret keeper is a middleman, does require trust. And I think that can only be demonstrated over time.
So people are beginning to trust the crypto industry again. It's slow. They're looking at FTX, they're looking at all the implosions, so people are dipping their in institutions, I think more than retail. What's it going to take to bring the retail back? I'm not talking like crypto native meme coin degens. I'm talking about retail who doesn't know any better, as well as institutions who might be able to buy cryptos outside of Bitcoin. What's it going to take for them to come into the fray again?
In my view, what we've had in the growth of the crypto industry over the last 10 plus years is the inverse of the growth of TradFi assets, where TradFi assets have adoption and systems of control at the institutional level first, and then years later trickle down to retail. We can buy Apple stock through a broker who gets it through the exchange, who gets it, who strikes a deal with a market maker. That the order of operation was, get the exchange and the market maker and the institutional flow in place first, and then it trickles down. In crypto, of course, it removes all barriers to entry, so you can own Bitcoin, you can own any exchange-listed asset as an individual. Right, so we've got this retail adoption that's waxed and waned over the last 10 years in very dramatic fashion. But I think what's going to trigger it now is the fact that the recent ETH ETF is a huge positive signal, because this means institutions are willing to wrap a cryptocurrency instrument in a digestible, tradable instrument. Shifting the center of gravity to institutional flow, well, even if retail flow is anemic at the moment, shifting the balance to institutional will ultimately result in it trickling back down to retail in maybe the order it was meant to be. There's a bit of too many words for that answer, but I hope that's useful.
No, there are. I mean, I'm looking what corporate place did you used to work? I was
at Barclays Capital for most of my career. There was 12 of my 18 years in banking.
So you were Barclays. I was at AIG.
Yeah.
And over the years, people like institutions, those financial institutions deteriorated trust. The trust from the people deteriorated over time.
Right.
So I'm just seeing I'm wondering how the trustless environment from crypto can help restore trust in those institutions.
Charlie Munger said, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. Now, incentives in investment banks and traditional finance institutions like AIG, like Barclays, have been skewed towards the individual trader or structure who has to strike a deal for their P&L, for their desk's P&L. It's a grotesquely skewed incentive model. In a decentralized crypto world, those incentives are effectively much more meritocratic. So I think whilst we've seen incentives skewed towards short-term individual and team profiteering, we're now seeing a much more democratized, decentralized business model where, for example, as an engineer, you don't have to be part of an army of full-time employees at an institution. You can just submit great code to the GitHub of any kind of protocol out there, and if it's good, you'll get your tokens.
There's another thing you haven't touched on yet, and I think it's true, and I want to get your perspective on this because you are a technologist and a developer, is there seems to be a global shortage of blockchain developers, right? What's the implication of that shortage, and how does what does it have, the impact it has on Web3 future?
Sure. So I guess it also depends which part of the world you're in. I guess at the global scale, there's definitely a shortage. But the thing, and I think we will talk briefly about this a bit later, but like coming from Serbia, which is an undeveloped technological ecosystem, it is interesting that we got, I'm going to dive a bit deeper later on this, but we got our time in the spotlight kind of for these things. And it's similar thing in India, for example, with Polygon and so many like Polygon, Instadap, like a bunch of DeFi projects coming from India, etc. So it's interesting that there's certain pockets, if you ever had it, like a heat map of the world in Web3 developers, that weren't the usual. That's for innovation. Let's put it that way. But there's definitely a shortage. AI isn't helping in the sense of all of the developers whose brain works. What's the current hype? And just go to that hype. They were here in the space in 2021. They're using the ChatGPT API right now in 2023. So we see this happening more and more. IoT before that, Kubernetes Cloud Native, and like all of the cloud stuff before that. There's this migration of interest for developers, I guess, over time. The way to address the global shortage, I guess, would be during college education, having stuff around blockchain, definitely. I remember, I mean, if any company does, and again, I'm using air quotes here, indoctrination extremely well, it's Microsoft. I did high school for computer science. You can specialize at high school level in Serbia. We were learning C# at the age of 13, 14. So it was like the first ecosystem I got into while I didn't know ecosystems exist. Like C# for me was similar to C or C++ or whatever. I didn't understand that I'm using a piece of tech owned by a private company or a public company, but owned by a company at that point. So once we actually start having like blockchain at the like high school level or college level or whatever, at that point we will not have a problem with shortage. Right now, how to attract engineers, I think I can say this as an engineer myself. We are ego-driven creatures in the sense of if we have trouble understanding something, we're always driven to come closer to it. Something similar to Icarus, I guess. So just showing how many interesting engineering problems exist in the space, and we will solve its shortage. And then implications right now, I guess it's just harder to persuade people to come into the space. Like the FTX thing, for example, that happened, I'm not at all diving into the financial implications. I just have a couple of developer friends who wanted to take out Web3 for a spin, like during their hobby weekend projects. And after that thing happened, they're like, this is a Ponzi and that's it. Like the optics right now are maybe harder than they were 2 years ago. But also, I mean, being founder of a Web3 company, I'm quite sure very soon that will go away and we'll have more talented individuals and teams coming into the space.
Yep, I'm going to ask you about Serbia, but I want to ask you first.
Sure.
You said optics.
Yeah,
the optics from the person who doesn't understand the space isn't good, but with any new technology in any new industry, you have to be able to put on those see-through glasses and look through the optics. You know.
Yeah.
What suggestions do you have to people who to put on those shades and see through the optics? What's your recommendation to them how to do it?
I'm guessing depends on what that person does. Like if it's an engineer, it's literally just send a transaction. The moment it clicked for me, I remember coming again back to the 48-hour hackathon. It was the first evening, and I think we're like 2 or 3 beers in, and Nebush was explaining proof of work to us at that point. And I remember he was explaining mining, and then at one point I asked, like, so wait, all of the computers in the world do the same thing that one computer did again to validate? And he was like, yeah. And I said, it's so dumb, like it makes no sense, it's so inefficient. Like the engineer in me was screaming. But like the next morning, when we started prototyping the thing, when I sent the transaction and realized that all of the computers in the world did the same thing because I've sent it. So it was the same thing, but you felt it under your fingertip. At that point, it clicked for me. So for engineers, it's mostly like show me the code and that's it.
Yep, I agree. So I want to find out how shared computing. I mean, it goes down to natural resources and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
How can shared computing reduce carbon emissions, especially like from those emissions caused by energy intensive data centers like Amazon Web Services and others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it costs like 300,000 to just deploy one single ash node at one single location. There's the kind of construction, building the data center, and having the cooling system. A lot of things that go into being able to have a data center somewhere, right? And with Bless, we're essentially eliminating a lot of those costs that has nothing to do with the compute hardware, the compute resource. So that is a key, I'd say, like differentiation between this people-powered compute network versus like having a data center that's constructed and owned by some of those centralized cloud providers. And talking about a carbon emission, I'd say this is like something that is becoming more of an issue than like a real issue other than something that people just talk about, right? I think there's like, I read somewhere that, like big companies like Google, AWS, for example, they actually underreport the carbon or energy consumption, whereas the actual usage is like 6 times more than what's been officially reported, right? And I think the like acceleration of modern like artificial intelligence, like autonomous vehicle, all those are really becoming a huge burden to the environment. And like from the ESG angle, right? The decentralized community-based network, what Bless is doing, it gives back a lot of those resources, the energy that otherwise would be wasted.
Let's talk about the ESG angle for a second then. What you're saying, a lot of these companies engage in greenwashing.
Yeah, I mean something like that.
Okay, so with your reduction of the overhead, right, and the use of, and combined with the use of AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can AI be used to eliminate or minimize the greenwashing? So so that your platform and can really thrive.
I'd say that AI is actually making it worse as it consumes more compute and energy resources, right? But it is a trend, like we're only going to consume more energy. And that's why being able to like control and own those critical resources is it's very important. Essentially, anyone that owns rules the world, right? And just for some very practical reasons, like I think there's this balance where centralized versus decentralized ownership, it have to coexist. And like Bless, we were kind of on the decentralized part of the industry. And yeah, I think like the energy, the environmental impact is something that decentralized infrastructure provides a lot of benefit over those centralized ways of approaching this, this problem.
Either. And so, I agree with you. It'd be great if we have it local. So we're talking about adoption, right? We're talking about if you could do it locally, you're gonna have more adoption, right? So I want to find out how ZKs and will pave the way for greater adoption. And that's the thing everybody keeps talking about is get more people involved. We're in the next billion. Well, I've heard it for years, but I haven't seen it. So how do you achieve it?
I think this is another one of those things where if I had all the answers, I'd be a very rich man. So like, well, one thing to maybe know is I'm not sure ZK, the technology is like, that's not really the user facing thing. Like, Joe Schmo on the street doesn't care whether it's ZK or something else. It's more about what it makes possible. Like, I think ultimately always adoption in every cycle so far comes from there being something that, more and more people want to do that just exists on chain, either because it's only possible to do on chain, sometimes just because it happens to be on chain. I'm kind of indifferent to which one pulls in adoption. But I think that's always where it comes from. So it's use cases, things like that. But we already have use cases which are driving huge amounts of adoption. The one I like to point to, which now is like pretty self-evident for everyone, but at some point wasn't as clear, is like, I think we have actual strong product market fit in payments. Which is funny because we were talking about this back in, when it was just Bitcoin. Everyone was like, oh, payments are going to be big. And it's like, well, it took 10 years, but whatever. And I think payments have like a lot of interesting dynamics that that ZK will help accelerate. So there's sort of some payments need to be really fast, but the thing with payments in general is that there's just like, if we actually want to onboard like all payments, that's a lot of payments. There is no L1, no chain that is able to handle that kind of volume. I suspect even theoretically it is impossible. And so we need to scale capacity to a point which we don't fully understand yet. So I'm maybe like not that focused on like what exactly is going to do what in this, year or this cycle. It's more like, in order for us to like win the long-term game, we need to be able to actually handle capacity, not just on the level of like a Visa or a MasterCard, but in terms of like what all kinds of monetary transactions happen in the traditional system in general. And it's a huge amount. And I don't think there's any other way to really scale to that point besides ZK. We can sacrifice on decentralization, of course, but then we kind of like, it kind of defeats the purpose of the effort in the first place. So I think sort of maybe I could sum it up as like, I even with just this one use case, like adoption will increase on a on some time horizon. Obviously markets will do what they do, but it will continuously generate new use cases and more adoption. And so we will need more capacity, and we do need the technology to be there. So this is sort of a little bit of a side topic, but I think it's sort of fascinating that in like every previous cycle before now, Ethereum was full. Like that was the problem. Like the big problem of crypto was basically we couldn't fit any more transactions into Ethereum. Gas fees skyrocketed. People were paying $500 in transaction fees for doing a DEX swap and things like that. That problem has now gone away, which is interesting. And now people are switching from the panic of like, oh no, we need to scale, to oh no, where's adoption coming from? And and that all makes sense, and that's sort of the way that it should go. But it is always worth bearing in mind that these things flip pretty easily, and things take time. You know, like payment adoption, especially where it seems like a lot of it is going to be coming from, like different payments companies using blockchain rails under the hood. Like that's just sort of integration work that doesn't happen overnight. And you know, if I'm, I don't know, PayPal or something, I don't want to just like have someone build something and be like, I'm sure it's great, and turn it on. Like I want to move really slowly and make sure it all works. So yeah, like in terms of the ZK industry, I guess mostly ZK rollups. I think where adoption comes from is simply just like there will be more demand, and regardless of what chain it ends up being on, at some point you need to scale it beyond what like an L1 can handle, and then you need to have ZK you know, working.